Wow. Thank you to the sisters who have already opened our world. Thank you so much. Yeah. I'd like to invite you for just a moment to stand up and stretch your bodies, because we've been sitting. Maybe stretch in whatever way you need to make your blood really flow. Stretch the wing bones back and up and down. Stretch over maybe. And have a seat again. I am so delighted to be here with you and to be actually back in northern Minnesota. This land is really precious to me for a number of reasons, one of which is that my very dear grandfather was called to Keewatin after he had retired from Concordia College and spent the end of his ministry in 3 churches in Keewatin. And visiting him, I just kind of fell in love with northern Minnesota. And I also want to say that I have never experienced such care and creative insight and collegial genius as I have experienced with the planning committee of the planning team of this event under the leadership of, or with the leadership of Kristen Foster. So let's give them a hand. It's really been beautiful to see the astounding degree of deep reflection that has gone into creating this day, or that God has given to these folks for the creating of this day. And then I'd invite us to take just a moment to share the joy of gratitude. We give thanks to the Creator for this gathering, for the inspired people who have midwifed it along the way, for the beauty of each person here gathered. We give thanks for all who have enabled us to be here in this moment. First and foremost, the trillions of microbial creatures in and on our bodies, enabling us to wake up and breathe and move. We give thanks to our ancestors that Dr. Kelly just called us so deeply to recall are a part of us. We give thanks for our companions in daily life. We give thanks. And then I ask you to remember who you are. You are beloved. The Holy One has made it so. I invite you to look at the person to your left and then your right, and let your eyes say to that person, "You are beloved." Wake up in the morning remembering that message. So this is holy ground, and we are beginning. Never before has the world so needed the church to be the church. In the words of a South African climate scientist, the next few years may be the most important in all of human history. Take it in. You and I are alive as human adults at what may be the pivotal point in the history of our species. Indeed, life on Earth now hovers at a fork in the road. One path leads to climate catastrophe beyond imagining. It is the path we are on. The other would lead to an Earth community that flourishes. Human decisions and actions will determine which path we choose. Some people say that it is a terrible time to be alive. Have you heard that? To the contrary, it is a very good time to be alive as church, a people created and called to receive God's astounding, justice-seeking, earth-relishing love, and to be its body on earth. A people called to cooperate with God's creating, healing, liberating work in this world. Now is a time for which the church was born. Let us be clear then about Earth's cry from a perspective of faith. Note 3 haunting realities. First, in Genesis, we learn that God's initial act was to create an earth community that God beheld as good. 7 times the Creator says it is good. The Hebrew word, now this is a little dangerous talking about Hebrew words in the face of a Hebrew Bible scholar, but I'll do it anyway. The Hebrew word that we translate as good does not mean just good. That's an inadequate translation. A fuller translation is a good that generates life, a life-furthering good. When I learned this, it took my breath away, because the climate change and eco-collapse, in doing that, we are doing the opposite, the precise opposite, undoing Earth's life-generating capacity. Earth will continue, but not its tov, what God declared it is, good, T-O-B or T-O-V, tov. We are undoing that. We are doing the opposite of God's primal act. That is horrifying. The opposite of God is called demonic or evil, whatever. Secondly, in Genesis, God declares our purpose. The human one is to serve and preserve God's good garden earth. The Hebrew words abat and shamar, often translated as to keep and to till, are better translated as to serve and preserve. The destruction of Earth's climate and other life support systems directly defies God's initial purpose for the human being. And third, it defies what Jesus calls God's great commandment, that is to guide our lives, to love neighbor as self. Instead, the climate catastrophe, and we as a part of causing it, is casting neighbors far and near into the jaws of death or suffering through rising seas, drought, floods, storms, and fires made more fierce by the changing climate. So, from a theological perspective, this fork in the road is indeed momentous. To carry on in the direction we are headed is to transgress God's primal activity on earth and our God-given purpose for being and our guide to life. But we could choose instead to cooperate with God, to serve and preserve creation and love neighbors. Your presence here on this day declares your choice of this life-giving path. There is no doubt we are called to that path. Yet, the forces lined up to keep us going along the path of destruction are mighty as the Pharaoh that we just heard about. Moreover, hope runs thin, seems absent. People with the courage to really recognize the extent of the damage done, you who dare to see with eyes open, we we have seen the data of despair, and hope can wear thin. So, the mighty spiritual challenge blazing before us is, in the midst of fear, anger, grief, confusion, perhaps numbness, how do we birth the hope and moral spiritual power to be who we are called to be? A people participating with God's healing and liberating activity on earth. Let us plow into that question together today. So, this is part 2 of my talk, the main part. How do we birth that moral spiritual power? Let us begin, and that moral spiritual power and hope. So let us begin with what hope is not. One false version of hope is optimism. Optimism says something like, come on, things will turn out okay if we just hang in there. The science and its awful assessments just can't be right. And if it is, technology will find solutions. Besides, my family and I are relatively safe. Well, yes, things may turn out okay for me, at least in the next few years. I will not go hungry due to drought-induced food shortage. I will not be without water because a mining company has toxified my water supply. If the forest fires burn my house, I have a car with which to flee. I have some savings to rebuild my house. But that hope is not godly, given that countless neighbors will find food, water, homes, and lives destroyed. They are already millions. Another false hope that I have heard says, the world is in God's hands, and God will handle this mess, so we can just go on living life as best we can. There's a variant of this. It is all part of God's plan. Have y'all heard those? Well, bad things, my friends, are not God's plan. And the biblical witness is that God works through human hands, rather than giving us a free pass to sit and watch God correct the wrongs of the world. It's in God's hands, don't worry about it, is another false version of hope. So can faith offer real hope? Real hope kicks in after the grounds for practical hope are gone. I recall vividly a turning point in my life when I had no hope. I was a young woman. I had become aware of the rampant social injustices that weave throughout our lives. It all started with a film that I saw in a regional Luther League assembly. Luther League, for those of you who are too young, was the Lutheran youth group. The film showed how workers in the Caribbean were brutally exploited in order to provide our inexpensive sugar, the history of sugar is awful, and fruit. And it blew my mind. I couldn't believe that our food was based on such brutality. And I began investigating more, I learned more, and I learned about all over the globe the extent to which economic systems were benefiting us and destroying people and lands. I became an activist for a few years, and then I learned more and more, and I lost hope. I thought I had no right to live because I was part of that imperial enterprise as a white middle-class American. And I knew I needed help. The Spirit, I am sure, told me to find someone who knew about systemic injustice and still had hope. And I thought of one person. and it was a Lutheran pastor up in Seattle. So I drove up to talk with him. I was in Tacoma, south of Seattle. I don't remember anything about that conversation other than the message I got. And this was a man his name was John Nelson. I don't know if you know the name. He had been deeply active in the anti-nuclear movement, peace movements throughout time. He had 13 adopted kids. Some of them adopted, some of them birth kids. And he knew how to laugh and face systemic evil. And actually his mother, oh, well, I won't go into that. I said, John, how do you maintain hope knowing what you know? And he said, this is what I recall his message was, Cindy, I know the end of the story. Okay, that told me the power of resurrection faith. And I'll speak more about that. He restored my hope. First Peter, I think it's First Peter says, be prepared to give an account of the hope that is in you. He gave an account of the hope that was in him, and it changed my life. Had he not planted that seed of hope in me, my power to respond would have remained strangled. His hope and grounds for it began to set me free to act. So as I see it now, there are two steps which are vitally important for birthing hope and moral spiritual power. One step is truth-telling. Truth-telling about what gets in our way of embodying our call to justice-seeking love. For me, it helps to see those seductive lures that would get in my way as voices whispering within me. Raise your hand if you hear any of these voices. One says, I cannot really make a difference. There is nothing I can really do. Do you ever hear that? Another says, it's not as bad as we think it is. That is the voice of privilege, speaking in a world, a dream world, in which the horrors are not going on because I don't experience them directly. It's the voice of denial. A third voice comes in when I do face the magnitude of the dangers, when my denial is overcome. Then I feel this foreboding sense of doom or powerlessness or too lateness. It whispers, the powers that be are too big for ordinary people to overcome or transform. We are doomed. Do you ever hear that voice? Yeah. So I invite you, in the days and months to come, to be alert to what might lure you, the voices in you that might lure you away from your path, away from your blessed calling to heed God's ways of justice-seeking, earth-relishing love. Listen for those voices and defy them. A second step toward hope and moral spiritual power is recognizing what God has already given us for birthing them. Jesus and many of the biblical communities that preceded him, including the communities of Shipra and Pua, practiced their faith in resistance to oppressive imperial powers. For Jesus, that was the greatest known power in the world, the Roman Empire. I noticed this sculpture. There's a little sign. Channel my strength. It says, channel my strength, rise with fierce love to protect what cannot speak. And it says that's the voice of the beast within. And I thought it said the voice of the beast within me. And I reflected on that as Dr. Kelly was speaking. She said, we're not a me, we're an us. I thought it should say the voice within us. And I read it again, and it says the voice within us. Wow! I'm going to take a picture of that and bring it around with me. So, remember also, Lutheranism was born of courageous, gospel-grounded resistance to power arrangements, beliefs, and life ways that obscured the gospel. We are called to know less. Lutheran traditions overflow with theological seeds of hope and moral spiritual power for resisting the oppressive powers and life ways that threaten Earth's fragile climate and vulnerable neighbors, including resisting predatory economic ways. So I invite you to explore with me 5 of those seeds of hope and moral spiritual power offered by our tradition. One is the amazing love story that is our home. Consider, if you will, the power of that story. The organizers of this event remember no stories have power. They invited you to enter into the story of Shipra and Pua. Doctors Kelly Sherman Conroy and Diane Jacobson drew you straight into that story. There is a good reason for grounding ourselves in story. Story, the power of story. One of our faith forebearers, the 2nd century Irenaeus of Lyon, leader of a resistance community that by claiming allegiance to Jesus Christ was saying non-allegiance to Caesar, which meant the risk of death by torture. Irenaeus was the person who insisted that the Christian scriptures, as the canon was being created, would include not only the Gospels and epistles, but also the Hebrew Bible. And why did he say that? Why did he say we need the Hebrew scriptures in our story? It was because, he says, he knew that people would have the fierce courage to resist allegiance to Caesar, declare allegiance to Jesus if they were grounded in a story that began with creation, went through the Exodus, the prophets, and on to the final fruition of the union of all with divine love. So he said, ground yourself in story. Learning from him and learning from our storytellers in this event, let us recall the power of story. You are baptized into the greatest love story ever told. It shakes the foundations of the world. Luther told it, hear it again. Our story begins with God's love, the creating, liberating, healing source loves this world and each of us with a love that will not fail, a love more powerful than any force in heaven or earth. The story goes on. This God is at play in the world, breathing life into it. And that is not all. We, human creatures, are created and called to recognize this indomitable love, to receive it and relish it, revel it in it, trust it. And then, and most amazing, after receiving and trusting God's love, we are to embody it in the world. We are beckoned to join with God's spirit of justice-making love in its steadfast commitment to gain fullness of life for all. To enable this, the Holy One, the transformative power of the universe, has come to abide within us and among us. And according to Luther, to abide within all of Earth's creatures and elements. You are a player in that story, the realist story. As Pastor John helped me to know, this story has an utterly sure ending, the details of which we will not know this side of death, of course. Living as players in this story is your life's work. This is an ancient faith claim. Luther nailed it. And as he so rightly insisted, this is not to win God's love, because that is already a given. Moreover, Luther insists, we will never love perfectly. To the contrary, we are, in his words, God's rusty tools, utterly fallible and finite in our loving. Martin Luther King Jr. said, I love this. Our responsibility as Christians is to discover the meaning of this command and to passionately seek to live it out in our daily lives. Discover the meaning. So let's discover, what does it mean for us today? How do we live this command to love? How do we live it out in the midst of climate catastrophe and all the challenges of oppressive power facing us now? Hint, hint, that would be a terrific focus of an adult forum or Bible study for a synod or a congregation for a year, to discern the meaning of love, love that strives for justice and cares for earth in this time of climate catastrophe. As you go on to explore and discern what it means, recall that our notions of love as a biblical calling and promise mean so much more than our profoundly truncated and domesticated ideas of love in our society. According to biblical tradition, neighbor love is not primarily a kind feeling or even empathy for others. No, it means serving their well-being, and it specifically includes intentional efforts to confront and transform all forms of injustice. Bonhoeffer called this putting a spoke in the wheel of injustice. It is central to the biblical calling to love. Luther, in fact, how many people here are ordained pastors? How many people, in addition to that, preach sometimes? Luther admonishes preachers regarding their roles and obligations in the face of practices that exploit the vulnerable. Pastors, preachers, he says, are to, I quote, unmask hidden injustice, thus opening the eyes of the secular authorities for their mandate to establish justice, end quote. They are to do this in many ways, including through the pulpit. So, quote Luther the next time someone tells you you should not address matters of justice or politics or economics or climate from your pulpit. So shortly we'll probe more what that means for our lives now, but first a few other seeds of hope and moral spiritual power. A second is a theology of the cross. It claims with fierce conviction that in the depths of human brokenness, brutality, desolation, apparent abandonment, the saving God is present. This claim is stranger than it seems. God's presence in the depth of our brokenness means that God is present even when we have no faith that God is present. Where God seems absent, there God is. It means that God's grace is with us even when we make terrible mistakes, fail in our calling, when we're complicit with systems of injustice, structural sin, such as being the perpetrators of climate change or the material beneficiaries of centuries of colonization, and more. This claim is so important to me. Otherwise, I would feel denounced. I would feel condemned by my role in climate change. I realize the truth of this claim that God's love for us cannot be stopped by our own wrongdoings. When my mother was killed years ago, she was She was murdered very, very brutally by 3 people. And I remember knowing deep within that God was with and loving my mother, and God was with and loving and still loving those men, no less. Nothing, says our ancestor, the Apostle Paul, even our roles in terrible wrong like climate change, nothing can separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ, Romans 8:39. That saving claim makes possible truth-telling about our lives rather than pretending that as we live is okay. So a third hope, root or seed of hope, is resurrection faith. Life in God is more powerful than all forms of death or destruction. This is the message that I got from Pastor John so long ago. And I speak very personally about this because I am so tempted toward living in despair when I acknowledge the foul matrix of powers that are keeping us as things are. But again, my hope and my spirit were restored by another person's resurrection faith, that the power of God's liberating love is greater than all else. Devastation is not the last word. We have heard the end of the story. In the midst of suffering and death, be it individual or social or ecological, the promise given to this earth community is that abundant life in God will reign. So speaks the resurrection. In all honesty, I do not know what this promise means for us and for Earth's community of life in practical terms. It does not lessen our call to build a more just, compassionate, and ecological world, to counter the dangerous policies of the current presidency or the forces aligned with it. Resurrection faith does not, that is, allow us to sit back and let God do the work. That would be absurd because God works through people. Nor does resurrection faith ensure the survival of our species in the face of climate change and ecosystem collapse. But it does ensure that the radiant good beyond comprehension, that is above, beyond, under, and within all, ultimately will bring all to fullness of life. We are to go forth trusting that promise. It is a third seed of hope and moral spiritual power. Signs and symbols of resurrection permeate our world. How many of you compost? Not long ago, I heard a woman named Conda Mason. She's the co-founder and president of Jubilee Justice Black Farmers Rice Project. She was speaking with contagious hope as a Black woman about social transformation in the image of composting. I cannot repeat her words, but I can sort of paraphrase. Get it? The stinkiness, the rot, the horrible sloppy mess. Sometimes it smells horrible and sloppy when you smell it in your kitchen and you take the lid off the compost pot. Well, that stinky mess begins to break down. It's chewed up by tenacious little creatures, some so seemingly insignificant that one cannot see them. They work together, perhaps not even knowing that the others exist. In the darkness and in the light, some are chewing, some are emitting chemicals, others aerate, and out of this arises abundant, fertile soil, bursting with life-generating capacity, overflowing with life force to sustain new life, resurrection. Our tradition, Christian traditions, have this as their bedrock. Life out of death and destruction even execution at the hands of the fiercest power then known to humankind, the Roman Empire. God wrestled life in magnificent fullness. So, a fourth source of hope that God has given us. We heard it beautifully told this morning by Dr. Kelly. You were baptized into a body, a community, a communion that extends long ago into the past and far into the future. You walk in the footsteps of resistors. Dr. Diane told us the story of two of them. You walk in the footsteps of resistors. They hold you. And this community encompasses people the world over, including people of goodwill, not necessarily knowing God through Jesus, but companions in love's work nonetheless. This community includes the birds, the bees, the trees, the mountains, the waters, the microbes within us. I am not an I. You are not an I. We are a we. We are a holy communion. And then a fifth source of hope. The Creator has given us the profound gift of sensuous beauty. We humans are splendidly sensuous creatures. We delight in the beauty of touch and taste, sound and smell. The gift of beauty leads us to relish the gift of being alive as earth creatures in an extravagantly beautiful world. Magnificent, almost beyond imagining. God has placed us into a feast of beauty. The beauty of a complete stranger's smile passing on the street. The touch of breeze on the skin when you walk out the door in Duluth. The undulating bends in the trunks of the old trees out there, the oak trees. The dazzling colors in the sky. The seasoned face of an old person. A back rub. The taste of ripe melons. How foolish if we do not savor it. Soak it in. In recent years, I have realized that part of our sacred journey is allowing beauty to feed us. I believe with all my heart that recognizing and relishing beauty, the beauty all about us, feeds hope and feeds moral spiritual power for life. So I implore you, as you continue the quest for faithful next steps in these perilous yet promising times, relish the beauty all around you, savor it, bathe in it, laugh with it. Perhaps your spiritual practice for the coming months could be a daily beauty bath, even if only for a moment or two to pause, and with awe and gratitude savor the feast of some beauty that offers itself to you in the moment. So these are 5 seeds of hope that God has already given to us to provide moral spiritual power for the work of healing this good creation and resisting all that is destroying it. Let's move then to a very brief and final part 3 of my comments. I call it, What Then Shall We Do? As players in this story, as body of God's justice-seeking, earth-treasuring love, what are we to do? The challenges before us are so great. The economy continues to cast many into the jaws of poverty and to destroy Earth's fragile ecosystems, so that a few may amass outrageous wealth. What are we to do? For me, it is helpful to have a framework for faithful action. I consider it a framework for love in action. Most importantly, this framework is built on knowing that we are first and foremost a we, rather than an I. Never see your actions as isolated, just what you can do. See what you do as part of a global and local we, a we that includes our ancestors, microbial life forms, sun rays, ocean waves, trees, bees, people still to be born, all part of a grand movement toward a world in which all can flourish. To get your we-ness, to conceptualize your we-ness a little bit, just imagine the utter inability of your thumb to get you out of a burning house. Nope, no good. Alone, the thumb can't do it. But think how utterly important your thumb is as a part of the we that will get you out of the burning house. It is the we of your entire body, and the bodies of the firefighters, and the bodies of the people who built the flame-retardant roof that gives you an extra minute, and so on. You only get out as a we, not as a solitary. We act as part of a God-given communion. So the framework I suggest for action by this we is a three-branched tree. Healing creation calls for change in three branches of our lives. They are our practices or behaviors, that is, our daily activities of households and churches, other institutions, practices. Secondly, social structures or systems. And third, mindsets, what we could call worldview or consciousness. Remember, theology and the church have a lot to contribute to that one, as well as to the others. Forging life ways, or life-giving ways of life, requires change in all three. Let's end here with an example of these three branches in the life of a congregation, seeking to confront the anguish of poverty and climate change. One change in the mindset or worldview branch is to transform this false idea that our impact on our neighbors and the earth is only through our personal interactions. It is not. I impact the earth and my neighbors also through systems of which I am a part. For example, the agricultural systems that provide my food are horrendous producers of climate change that is killing neighbors. The transportation system that brought me here by air is doing the same thing. We impact by virtue of the systems of which we're a part. So our mindset in modernity is trained to think we impact people just interpersonally, but no. Neighbor love pertains also to the systems of which we're a part. How could we change, how could we change that mindset change to change in the other two branches, lifestyle and social structures? Worldview, lifestyle, social structures. Imagine that you want a group of confirmands. How many of you work in some way with young people? Imagine that you want a group of young people to shift the perception or worldview to see that neighbors are whomever my life touches through systems. It's a very hard thing to conceptualize. That neighbors are the people my life touches, who made my garments, who brought my food. So you give them an assignment. They are to trace the impacts of the congregation's communion practice on the earth and on human neighbors, including carbon footprint. They have 2 weeks to do it. They dig in. They trace the bread and the wine and the juice, the textiles on the altar, the cups, the chalice, and more, where the wheat and grapes were likely grown, how the workers were treated and paid, how far it came from. Whew, what do they find? The pyramids. and the pastor's garb were made of fabric made in a sweatshop in Bangladesh, run by a company in which workers are virtually enslaved. The bread was made from flour that had been shipped hundreds of miles and hence was a veritable smokestack of greenhouse gases. The little cups were made of plastic, which is now a threat to life in so many ways. The metal in the chalice was likely mined in Zambia by a company that left a lake so toxic that my colleague's brother died from swimming in it. The youth were appalled to find the damage done through the systems that connected them to these neighbors. Just the carbon footprint alone, that is the greenhouse gases emitted by transporting things, they found it all to be outrageous. And then you lead them in a study of Luther's writing on the power of the Eucharist. He teaches that where the Eucharist is, I quote, properly practiced, it creates a community of people, this is Luther, engaged in public life on behalf of the common good, especially the good of impoverished people. For Luther, that included vehemently denouncing exploitative economic practices and systems that were emerging in his time. He denounced practices central to the early capitalism rising in his time. Communion was to weave us into a body that served especially the vulnerable neighbor. So, inspired by Luther, these young people decide to figure out how the congregation could celebrate the Eucharist in ways that had this transformative impact, leading people to serve neighbors' well-being today in the midst of exploitative, extractive economic ways. The confirmands propose a complete redesign of the Eucharist so that it did no damage to earth or neighbors. They shared this with the adults in the congregation, convincing enough of the adults that this was really important, that it related to loving or damaging neighbors, and therefore it had to do with following Jesus and obeying God's commandment to love and care for the people and care for the earth. By a few months later, the youth have inspired the congregation to change things up. They now buy wine only and bread only from companies that have clean supply chains and green supply chains, no exploitation, regionally produced. The textiles come from a worker-owned cooperative of indigenous women, and more. This was change in the branch we have called lifestyle practices in our framework of 3 branches. What if the congregation were to take it further? What if they decided that neighbor love called for moving beyond lifestyle practices to engage the 3rd branch, systems change? They decide to join the Lutheran World Federation and World Council of Churches work on a global campaign to prohibit mining companies from destroying ecosystems in the name of maximizing profit, and to protect the workers' and to protect the workers' incomes and job security in the process of it. They heed the Lutheran World Federation's call to divest from fossil fuels and call upon the ELCA to follow suit. They tell the large grocers in their city that they will continue buying supplies for them only if they start selling regionally grown produce. They instigate a faithful Lenten practice of fasting from plastics throughout the synods of the Upper Midwest. Their synod leads the way in calling the ELCA to practice the Eucharist, baptism, worship, coffee hour, meals, and more in ways that are neighbor-loving and earth-serving, grounded in Luther's teachings about the Eucharist. Well, for now, the point is this. Building earth-healing, neighbor-loving ways of life entails change in 3 branches of our lives, and they are connected: practices, social structures, and mindsets or worldviews. Guidance in this work of faith-rooted change is the purpose of a new book series called Building a Moral Economy: Pathways for People of Courage. It was inspired by Martin Luther King Jr.'s challenge to Christians. I repeat, our responsibility as Christians is to discover the meaning of the commandment to love and seek passionately to live it out in our lives, end quote. So this series aims at helping us to do exactly that. It teaches 10 fingers on the hands of healing change, that is 10 forms of action. The first volume is out. You can check it out in the books, in the gathering space out there. And the next volume is on its way, and it pertains specifically to climate justice, climate hope. So in sum, we live at a pivotal point in human history, a time both terrible and overflowing with potential for more faithful living. In this time, we are called to be God's body. You're called to be God's body. We are called to be God's body on earth, bearers of God's healing, liberating power. We have viewed 5 seeds of hope and moral spiritual power given to us by God for heeding this calling. And we have glimpsed a framework of acting on that hope. It involves acting as a we, not an I, and it entails change in all 3 interconnected branches of our lives. Each one of you has a key role within this body, this vast cloud of witnesses. I thank God for planting in you a holy hunger and the seeds of hope and moral spiritual power. And I trust you to share it and to share and receive God's ongoing watering of those seeds within you. They will bear rich fruit beyond your imagining. Thank you.